And now welcome everyone to Press TV's news review program, where we get in-depth in one of the day's top stories. Economic hardships have put young Britons at risk of sexual and criminal exploitation during the school summer holidays. That's according to the largest children's charity in the United Kingdom. Charity Barnardo's, that works for and with vulnerable children, issued the warning after conducting a survey. Its findings revealed more than half of the British parents will find it difficult to afford the cost of leisure activities over the 6-week school break. According to the charity, the cost of living crisis continues to push families into poverty and makes children increasingly susceptible to criminal gangs. More than half of the children surveyed said they're concerned about being bored and having nothing to do this summer. Barnardo's has called for urgent government intervention on the issue. Official data also shows over 16,000 children face sexual exploitation in England each and every year. And now joining us for the program is Saeed Puriza, Press TV correspondent, joining us from London, and Mr. Mick Napier, activist and commentator, joining us from Edinburgh. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program here. Saeed, we're going to start with you. Hope you're safe and doing well out there, bud. Tell us the plight of British children today, especially in this crippling economy we're seeing. Saeed, can you hear us?
I'm sorry, I missed your question, Danny. If you could come again, I'd appreciate it.
I'm going to try to keep it really simple. Tell us, if you can, the plight of British kids and how they're surviving and the impacts of this crippling economy on their livelihoods.
Well, as you said, the report by Barnardo really makes for some grim reading in terms of the impact that the cost of living is having on the lives of youngsters in this country. Again, the constant refrain in the report is the cost of living crisis that we have been reporting on for the past year. And the impact it's had not just on children and on their families at large. And the number of families that have had to fall on their knees asking for help from food banks, as well as people who are in full employment not being able to make ends meet, having to withdraw their labor and come out onto the streets demanding for higher pay. And I've seen workers over the past year in the rail industry, in education, in the healthcare sector, pretty much across the public sector, coming out asking for a pay rise. I must say, of course, this report is about the impact that the cost of living crisis is having on children in general, and the fact that they are at risk of being criminally or sexually exploited online. It's a problem that's always been there, but it's only about to get exacerbated this summer as the cost of living also aggravates here. The reason being, inflation is at oscillating between 9 and 11% over the past year. Food prices up between 15 and 19%. And you're looking at families who are barely making ends meet in terms of putting food on the table, paying their rent, that's also gone up, and looking after their children. A lot of vulnerable families having to take second jobs, which means they will be out there working into the wee hours, some working irregular hours, which probably means overnight, and not being around to take their sons and daughters, for example, into parks and play with them, or afford activities that would occupy their children's time when they're away at work. And one of the responsibilities of, for instance,
Okay, it seems like we're having technical difficulties with Saeed. We can't really hear you right now, so you might want to hold off there for a second. Mr. Mick Napier, welcome to the program, sir. Now, Mick, I was looking up the number of kids and the per capita numbers here. Number of children under 16 years old has increased in the UK, ironically, by 8% to 12.7 million The working age population, those 16 to 64 years old, increased by only 3.2%. The lowest growth of any age group. Number of people aged 65 years and over increased by 22.9% to 12.4 million. So you're talking about 12.7 million kids under the age of 16 years old. That's quite a chunk of the British population, and it's going to grow. You very well know this is happening across a number of countries. So your thoughts on the impacts of soaring inflation, cost of living crisis, and what this holds and how it, for the future of these children in the United Kingdom?
Well, the Barnardo's report does flesh out those numbers. Over 4 million children are living in poverty. That's 29% of all children. It's not evenly distributed. Almost half, 48%, of non-white children live in poverty. It's a quarter for white children. It's really high for white children, but it's monstrously high, twice as much for non-white children. Almost half again, 44%, of all families where there's a single parent bringing in possibly a salary or living on benefits live in poverty. And the great majority of children living in poverty don't have parents who are unemployed, but have at least one parent who's in full-time employment, bringing in a wage. Over 70% of all people in that, of families in that category, children live in poverty. So it's a grim situation in the sixth largest economy in the world, in a very rich country indeed. And it's not an accident. There was a policy towards the end of the last century, from 1998, for about 5 years, there was a government policy to consciously try to bring down child poverty, and it worked. Over 500,000 children were brought out of child poverty, but that's now gone into reverse. And it's not an accident, because this government actually uses the state through the situation where people in work don't earn enough to support their families. It actually uses these subsidies as an indirect subsidy to big business. So an employer paying below a living wage, his employee or employees turns to the state for a subsidy in order to make the barest of ends meet. And of course, this is no surprise coming from the Conservative Party, who are the party of big business. It isn't an accident. Somebody said, it was a businessman actually, pointed out, there are almost twice as many food banks in Britain as McDonald's branches. And there's a lot of McDonald's branches. There's almost 2,500 food banks when it was last counted. But you know, you can gauge the attitude of this government to this horrendous crisis, because it really is terrible suffering for poor people. When you look at the fact that in terms of vulnerability to sexual exploitation, 200 children living in asylum seeker accommodation who've arrived here without parents have disappeared, and nobody knows where they are, and they are clearly at a great risk. But that's no accident, because the government has deliberately set out to create what it calls a hostile environment for these people. And you know,
Mick,
all the institutions of our state show that they are incapable of protecting children from sexual exploitation.
We don't have a lot of time, Mick. I want to get this last question out to you. We know that Brexit was supposed to make the UK a more independent and financially secure nation. So, I mean, what do you attribute what we're seeing today to? I mean, the cost of living crisis, soaring runaway inflation, is it due to Brexit, the Ukraine war, to big business running amok, the coronavirus pandemic? Where do you put the majority of the blame at, or on government itself?
It's really multifactorial. This government has been preparing for this war, has been nudging towards a war with Russia for quite a few years now. Brexit was an example of getting people to vote for a party that was hostile to their interests by playing the drum of patriotism, jingoism, and hostility to the EU. So the war is creating a situation of 20% food inflation. Your correspondent said 19.5, 20%. So when you bring all these things together, people are suffering much more than they did in the past. And but at the same time, we have the creation of millionaires and billionaires also at an unprecedented rate. So it's this yawning gap between rich and poor, which has become even more yawning, which is an inevitable part of this overall crisis that Press TV is highlighting.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Time has gotten the better of us there, but thank you both and stay safe, both of you. That was Saeed Perez, our Press TV correspondent there, joining us from London, and Mick Napier, activist and commentator, joining us from Edinburgh. And viewers, that brings us to the conclusion of this segment of your Press TV News Review program. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye for now.